Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to have you here today. Sally and I are here from the Center of Excellence in Learning and Teaching. We're really excited to be collaborating with Faculty Affairs to offer this session on engaging with students, checking in with students, and thinking about how you can engage them remotely and what strategies might be useful going forward as return to campus looms. And we're thinking about what we have done and could do moving forward. And I don't want to take much time away from our panelists. So I'm going to pass the floor right over to Sally to introduce our panelists, and then we'll get right into it.
Sounds good. And I'll quickly introduce myself as well. I'm Sally Goldberg Powell. I'm an instructional technologist with the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. I also teach a first-year course in the journalism department, actually two, one in the fall and one in the winter. I've been doing so for about 5 years now. So that's my background. I also got the opportunity to meet two of our panelists before, because over the last year, I've been working on something called the Inspired Teaching Showcase, which was looking at examples of how people were teaching remotely for now, and we're hoping to keep it going as we continue, and looking at other examples of inspired teaching practices and sharing stories using this platform. So two of the people here today I've already spoken to. One more I might grab soon and interview as well for that process. So I'm looking forward to sharing these stories with you and providing this great space and being part of this this experience where we get to hear from other people and what they've done in their disciplines. And what's great about our panel today is that they do represent three very different disciplines, and will have different approaches to how they were connecting with students throughout this time, and can speak also to things that they've done in the past as well. So joining us today, we have Dr. Kiana Basiri, who is an assistant professor with the Real Estate Management Department. You want to wave? At the Ted Rogers School of Management, and she teaches courses in real estate economics and valuation. We also have Dr. Jan Matajevic. I knew I was going to do this. Matajevic. I practiced so many times.
It's okay,
Matajevic. Who is an assistant professor with the Department of Chemistry and Biology, teaching courses in organic chemistry and biochem, and also teaches a first-year required course in general chemistry for food and nutrition students. So has a lot to say about those large first-year's classes. We also have Dr. Dana Osborne with us, who is an assistant professor with the Department of Languages, Literature, and Cultures within the Faculty of Arts. And she teaches courses in anthropology and language and intercultural relations at both the graduate and undergraduate levels. So lots of expertise, lots of different expertise on the panel. So we'll get right into it, and I'll let you all take a chance to just introduce something about the kind of courses you taught, especially during this remote time, and what changed in the way you and your students were experiencing the courses. So we'll start with Kiana.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and share my experience with you. I actually started in January 2020. So the first semester, half of it was in person. I designed the whole course for an in-person class. We got to the midterm, and after that we went online, and I had to quickly change everything for a virtual setting. I teach, as Sally mentioned, real estate economics and real estate valuation in real estate department. These are the real estate valuation are or second year courses with a large number of students. I had 140, 150 students in my class. And also real estate econ, which is upper level undergraduate course. And I usually get between 40 to 60 students in the class. I'm happy to be here. I'll let everybody else to just talk a little bit about their course, and then we continue. Thanks.
Sounds good. I'll pass it over to Jan.
Yeah, hi there. I'm also super happy to be here, and I'm so happy that all of you are here as well. In January of 2020, I was teaching a 400 series biochem course. So it's the highest level, well, one of the highest levels of biochem taught at Ryerson, and a 200 series organic chemistry course for a School of Nutrition students. And my courses are kind of very hands-on. I'm very hands-on with the students in that it's kind of skill-based, and I need them to draw and do calculations and things like that. So I tend to wander around the room. So it was a very huge sort of change when we had to go virtual. And so that kind of went out the window, and it turned into that I would have a lot more office hours just to have students come and say, hey, I'm having issues with this. And the technology became a bit of an issue, because if people are working on paper and then they hold up their paper to the screen, sometimes it's hard to see. I'm definitely looking forward to talking more about how I transitioned. And my message is consistency, consistency, consistency. Both classes were large at that time, about 130 to 140 students. But since then, I've had classes of like 9, and that's a whole other, fishbowl to venture into. So I'll definitely be talking about that.
It sounds good. And I know you also had students who were returning that you'd taught before in person, and then they got to know you online. So you had that other transition to consider as well.
Well, that's true. And just very briefly, they got to know me a lot better in the online environment, for sure.
Yeah, and that's an interesting surprise that we'll definitely get into for the next question, because absolutely that's a surprise, I think, for a lot of us, that we were able to connect in new ways online. Dana, I'd let you introduce yourself.
Sure. So I've been actually at the university since 2016. And of course, in 2016, we were still teaching in the traditional method, in person. And I guess it was in the winter of 2019 that we actually did that transition, or 2020. And, it was quite jarring, actually, because I was teaching a large introductory linguistics course, and everyone was like, what do we do? So it was, I had a capacity of like 120 students in that class. And we were triaging at that point, for sure, in that larger class. So, the whole sort of combination of classes that I teach, I'm teaching courses in anthropology, language and intercultural relations, arts and contemporary studies, which are deeply theoretical in nature, right? And so, introduction to linguistics, obviously an intro course of over 100 students, introduction to anthropology, introduction course of over 100 students. Also, ethnographic methods course taught in language and intercultural relations, right? So how do you teach ethnographic methods in an online environment? Adapting that has been incredibly difficult, I think, in some ways, but also has revealed some ways in which, we can actually sort of do better when going back in person, learning some of the loopholes and the potential drawbacks of doing ethnography in a certain kind of way. So I think one of the things that the online situation has really sort of brought to the fore for me is reinterrogating some of my long-held beliefs about like how to teach in person or how to teach generally, because it's been a radical transformation. It's asked you to confront a lot of those things. So, just with regard to, again, some of those changes, I think that there have been some positives. I think, like Jan, I'm a mover. I'm up and I'm talking to students, and I'm getting together with students in groups or individually. I'm checking in, etc. There is something strange and possibly wonderful, I'm not sure, I'm a little on the fence about it, about seeing your students' faces in this context, because obviously if you have a group of 100 students, it's really hard to see their faces. And that actually sort of accomplishes something new and different. That is to say, those students who turn on their cameras, what about everybody else, right? So there's this degree of, I think, intimacy in that way, but I think that there are some things that we could potentially adapt. But, I will say for the most part, I miss in person. I want it. Let's go back.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and it's that we'll probably delve into that more too. The whole idea, like this false sense that you're getting this really intimate connection with people, and then you realize you're looking at page one if you're in a large class of multiple pages of people, right? And you're missing out on what those. So it's a strange space to be in sometimes, because it's more intimate with some, and even even more distant with others, so that gets tricky. But I think it's really interesting to pick up on that idea of consistency that Jan mentioned earlier, and I know that especially for Kiana and Jan, who teach the disciplines that are very, based on, there's a lot of like calculations and specifics and things that you need to go through and master as you go through as well. I know that was big for both of you, especially. Do you want, let's start talking about what worked for you in terms of maintaining that consistency for students and how you communicated that with them when there was that transition. So Jan, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, well, in March of 2020, it was chaos all around us. And I figured that, you know what, in everything that's going on, let's have one thing that does not change and is predictable and is consistent. So at that point, like I said, I was teaching 2 rather large classes. And I had told them that nothing's going to change. Our lectures are scheduled for this time and this time. We're going to meet. We were using Google Meet at that time. We're going to meet here at these times and have our lectures as usual. Sure, they're going to be a virtual. And other than that, nothing really changed. I mean, I offered more office hours because I think a lot of times there's barriers for students to come to your physical office for whatever reason. They're, at home, but this enabled them to come to virtual office hours from home. So that kind of worked. That kind of, calm in a rough sea otherwise.
Yeah, and that's a difference between, the traditional online learning perspective and the dealing with a crisis perspective when you're switching between these spaces, right? So I think people were really craving that consistency or routine or maintaining that so that they knew what to expect, for sure. Kiana, is there anything you'd like to add to the idea of consistency?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about actually my experience with online teaching was more interaction actually with students rather than in person, because the type of courses we teach, it's lecture based. You speak for like 2.5 hours at most, and maybe pause here and there, ask question, nobody answers, maybe 1 or 2, a little bit of a group project if people, you can't force them really to do that. I know it's going to be the same in online format as well, but participation, I'm usually like I don't know, like for all disciplines, but like 20-30% would usually come to the class. When we went online, in my virtual classes, I had like 80% of the class came online to the live sections. What I tried to do was in terms of the consistency, was the format of the class. In addition to the time that we were supposed to honor, the format I choose to deliver my course was that the 3 hours was divided into 3 sections. I communicated that in the course outline and the overview on D2L, and I had it divided to individual study, class activities, and group projects. So I'm a true believer of group projects. When we went virtual, we got a lot of messages around that. Hey, think about different way of you do that final grading. Maybe don't do a big exam, because we're still figuring out. Definitely do not. Like, I had a long conversation with our chair to make sure that they are not gonna meet, even if it's group projects, make sure that, they're gonna stay safe and, they honor that policies that we want them to, stay home. But I kept my group project. That meant that I had to facilitate that for them to find a group to work with and give them that time to work on their group projects, because I'm assuming they are not gonna be on campus. What I did is that I did a lot of recordings for the first hour, which, let's say if my class is 9 to 12, so the 9 to 10, they are just gonna do the individual watching the recordings and go through the slides. 10, they would come live and we just do all the activities and discussions and, solving. And this is gonna be mainly through the breakout rooms. And then the last hour, is I put them back again in the breakout room for their group projects. I can explain a little bit about like how I facilitate groups for them, and then I have that one-on-one meeting with student. It's voluntary based for everybody else who are on a breakout room working on their group projects. In the beginning of the class, they use the chat box, they say, and like it's either through private messages or for everybody that I want to have a one-on-one with you. So I have a list of 3 to 5 students here and there to have a one-on-one with me. We're gonna do like a really short 5 minutes. I give them instruction to follow. Of course, they can just ask me anything else, but I'll just tell them like you can discuss like what you want to learn, goals, stuff like that. So I'll just give them some bullet point if they want to meet and they really don't know what to talk about, and I keep the format consistent with all my courses. So if students take one of my courses, they all know that this is the format we're going to follow, and it really worked well for me.
Great. And what I like about that too is it's interesting that it's not just consistency of format, but what really was important to you too was the consistency of the communication with them in terms of like making sure that they knew what to expect everywhere. And so the consistency went beyond just how they were experiencing it, but it's also about, making that information about what to expect available in multiple places, exactly the same information, repeating it, keeping that consistent. And that like is so important. I think in those spaces that are virtual, especially, we take for granted that you post it somewhere and they're all going to see it. And I think it's really important to reiterate. Absolutely. For sure. So moving past consistency and moving into surprises or changes or ways that you this opportunity presented itself to like rethink how you teach a course. I'm going to take it over to Dana now to talk a little bit more about the idea of shifting focus or coming up with a new approach and what you came up with.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. And, I think based on sort of the point of Kiana and Jan as well, consistency, I think, is absolutely just so core and central to being able to do something well, especially in this time. And I think, it's because of the demands on students these days. Many students are working, many students have family members that they're taking care of, many students have other things that they have going on in their lives. So I think, with regards to that consistency, that possibility for students to just really slot into their calendars what's going to happen over the course of the week and creating possibilities for them to do that by way of making a predictable schedule, I think is absolutely critical. So linking up with that, I think, one of the things that happened when we were forced to transition, of course, in the semester in the fall of 2020 is I was teaching one of my favorite courses, Introduction to Anthropology, ANT 100, which has typically about 120 students enrolled. Now, I was teaching this class extremely traditionally out of like a very dense 4-field textbook. We had tests, we had, a few writing things throughout the course of the semester, culminating in a large paper, all the classics that everyone is accustomed to. And I realized that, having done some research and understanding, again, student psychology and a lot of the pressures that our students are under, that format was just not going to work. And so I spent the summer poring over pedagogical material and trying to come up with a plan that was going to work for us. And I actually happened upon the fabulous and wonderful scholarship, pedagogical and otherwise, of Dr. Michael Wesch, actually, who's in the States. He's an anthropologist. He wrote a book, it's an open source textbook called The Art of Being Human. And it's a very narrative-based, extraordinarily, it just sucks you in. He tells a story of him of himself as an anthropologist doing field work in Papua New Guinea. And of course, the vast majority of students are not going to have visited, have had the opportunity to visit Papua New Guinea. But, this has been an incredibly effective pedagogical tool that I have brought to the table. Yeah, thank you, Sally. And, you know, Dr. Wesh has spent so much time thinking through, again, the details of how to engage students both in in-person platforms and in online platforms. And this semester, I'm actually having the opportunity to apply Dr. Wesh's pedagogical sort of framework in an in-person class. So even though the Faculty of Arts, I think the stats are, what is it, Sally? Like 9% of the Faculty of Arts courses are being currently offered online, sort of in this format. But you know, so I tried this online. It was extraordinarily effective. Students loved it. Like small, low stakes assignments every single week of about 400 words, coming to class for discussion, whether online or in person, little low stakes quizzes throughout just to make sure that students are sort of keeping a pace of readings. And, you know, the whole point of, in my mind, of course, of a lot of these lower level liberals is to orient and to enculturate students on how to do university, right? So it's those, right, Jan? I mean, so it's those foundational courses that really sort of teach them how to do this project, to instill a habitus, right? Just to bring in a little anthropology of doing studentship. So, you know, I think in so many ways, it's been an incredibly effective tool. It's so different than what I had going on before, which was a very traditional, you know, textbook, like high stakes exams, high stakes final paper. And of course, students are freaking out about it. You know, like anyway, in the best of times, right? So, you know, I think this has been a technique that's been extraordinarily effective. And it's one that I'm hoping to bring to my other lower level liberal 100 level courses, which I love teaching, you know, whether it's linguistics or, you know, anthropology or whatever it is. It's deeply reflexive and deeply transformational. And, you know, if that's not teaching, I don't know what is. So, and students love it. So we'll see how it goes in person. But yeah, so far so good.
These opportunities for reflection, you know what I mean? Like these opportunities throughout the learning to like sort of know, to check in, not just for you to check in with them, but for them to check in with themselves. It really seemed to be a big shift that we're all sort of moving towards, you know, giving them that space. And so I sort of want to move into that space because I want to make sure we have time for questions, or we can sort of delve into some more things here. And I'm thinking about that check-in with your students and how using some of the technology or using some of these ways to connect with students more regularly, how that sort of ended up being a benefit as well. So yeah, I think we'll go back to Jan, and we'll continue our circle, and we'll just talk about like ways that you were able to check in with students in terms of where they were, how they were doing. That might be, you know, there were the office hours, but maybe there were other little techniques that also helped you get a sense of how this class was doing as a whole.
Right. Okay. So actually, I'm going to ask, can I share my screen? Like, I know there's a portion of this where we can share screens. I just want to.
Yeah, let me see if I need to make you a host, and I will, or a co-host, and I will do that for you.
Or even share screen. I think you have advanced options. Anyone can share. So let me just talk about things. So I leveraged Zoom, some of the features of Zoom to instantly check in with, okay, here we go. So what I'm actually showing you is the PowerPoint from one of my very first classes. So, you know, we start on Ryerson time at 10 after. So, you know, on the hour, I come into class, I open up, I close the waiting room, everyone comes in, and they either have a word search or a or they color here. So using the annotation feature on Zoom, they can use a crossword puzzle or math problems or write poetry. But then, you know, other ways that I engage with them at the outset is using the annotation tool on Zoom is, where are you? Like, let us know where you are. And, you know, we talk about the different challenges people might have in different time zones and things like that. So I've only got a few more slides, not to worry. Of course, there was a land acknowledgement, but then things like this. So how are you doing? And again, setting up on Zoom sort of anonymous annotation, and people can write things in or place stickers And, you know, we talk about, and I talk about my own experience on how I'm doing. So I think it's important to be, you know, have a personal element to it. Again, this is the first day of the course, so people place their stickers wherever they, you know, where they were at in terms of their headspace. And we talked about that. Again, first day of the course, burning questions. And I mean, burning questions also can be at the beginning of any class, or even at the end of the class, you say, are there like any exit questions that you might have? And in terms of educational technologies, so things such as iClickers are there that you can gauge student understanding as you go along. Mentimeter, Kahoots, I use Top Hat. So here was a question about the periodic table, and I see from the heat map, we really needed to talk about this question. So it's a way of gauging the class right then and there to see where everyone is at. We just form the discussions of our class based on their understandings. So that was some of the ways that I kind of engage with the class synchronously. Now, maybe later on, I'll have an opportunity to talk about engaging with them asynchronously, but these are just some of the things that I did.
Well, those are fantastic, and I'm glad you shared. And I know you were like, oh, no, I've got another one. Sorry about that, but I think these are the kinds of things that people are really open to seeing and thinking through, and that's fantastic. I've done one somewhat similar called Mood Cats, where I have a shot of a whole bunch of different cats and say, click on the cat that is how you're feeling today. But yeah, I love some of those tools, some of those things that just get students, they give them an opportunity to tell you something about them in a safe way, and that can really help to build that relationship. Kiana.
Great ideas for a live class. I usually try to, other than the one-on-one that I encourage them to have with me, I usually take advantage of the discussion board in D2L, and I have set up different discussion boards. The first one is for the first class to just introduce themselves and say something interesting, say something boring about themselves, and what are they hoping to learn in this course. I not grade all the discussion board, but I do the first one. Like I really encourage them to all introduce themselves, and it's going to be a very small grade in terms of the participation, because I want them to take the time to introduce themselves and read everybody's else introduction, that start giving some sense of community. And when I'm having the topics, I usually set up a discussion board. If you're talking about rent controls or minimum wage or zoning, stuff like that, I ask them to share their own idea about whether they think it's good or bad, and what are their thoughts. You've been surprised to read some of those discussions. They usually share sometimes a very personal, inside there, and I usually take my time to read and put a comments, even if it's just very interesting, but I usually try to engage a little bit on those discussion boards. Yeah, so what Jan said in the first class, usually where are you dialing in, those small icebreaker for the first class to sort of help them. But I usually try to put them in the same group that they are working on a breakout rooms every time, and I will join them and try to have a little bit chat. This is just for me to help them to sort of get to know people, although it's just not the whole class, but the same people over and over for every week for their group projects, and sort of have that sense of, they start making something that they can work with as a group.
Yeah, it's great that consistency of teams in a way has also been really effective for a lot of people out there. I know there's also a couple of other examples of that are shared on the Inspired Teaching from, I believe, Michael Raby, and there's another one as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but do these the group projects where you get to know your small group within the larger class and build community that way as well. It is great. And just since we're sharing, I'm just going to share a quick link here in the chat. One of the ones that I use a lot in my class as well is using the Google Forms tool to take to give students the opportunity to try things or to reflect on things. And we've actually developed a series of templates that are available to you at the center. So if you want to peruse our templates and take a look at them and see if any of them would work for you, feel free. And I just shared that link for you in the chat. So I'll move over to Dana now and talk about how I think this new approach that you took also meant there was a lot more sharing in your class and personal experiences and transformative moments that that you got some very interesting insights in your class.
Yeah, I think that with regard to this particular class, the Introduction to Anthropology, I think it's sort of designed in such a way as to really bring forward a lot of the autobiographical experiences of students. And one of the fabulous things, of course, about our university is that we have students from everywhere, right, whose parents are from everywhere. Every language is being spoken, right? So I think that it's so fascinating to be able to create opportunities for students. Last semester, we had, or sort of in the semester of 2020 of fall, we had a lot of students whose parents were from South Asia. So I ended up being able to really bring in a lot of ethnographic examples that were focused very specifically on the South Asian context. And I think, that really inspired a lot of really extremely effective discussion in the context of the classroom. So I think this is one of the things that actually is afforded by the online platform, is that you do get very vociferous people who want to contribute in various ways, and students learn from each other, I think, in beautiful ways. So that was one of the things that that I learned from this new way, and I'm trying to adapt this in various ways. But obviously, being able to click on somebody and say, "Oh, what do you think?" in the context of a Zoom is a lot different than moving up the stairs and giving somebody a mic and saying, "Okay, well, what do you think?" Which is what I'm doing right now. It's a little bit different. So I also want to sort of clip into the point about the value of checking in. And I think little check-ins, just like what Jan was identifying, just like what Kiana was identifying, things that we as professors oftentimes don't necessarily think of as particularly useful for students, actually, like them having the opportunity to get in on a Zoom and to activate a marker and to identify, yes, I'm in Nigeria right now, that makes a big difference. Or even, I like to start and end class with bookends. So I will always begin with, "Hey, Jan, how are you doing today?" Or, "Hey, Sally, how's life?" And that makes a big difference for students. Even if they are not saying anything, they're hearing about sometimes the experiences of others. "Doctor, I'm having a tough time. I just had 3 tests in a row. Oh, that's tough." Even something like that makes a big difference to, I think, contributing to the culture of a class, both in person and in the online platform. So I just want to maybe put that in there as well as something that's so important. That again, we as profs don't necessarily get the feedback in the traditional way. You can't see students smiling or nodding or leaning to each other and whispering, "Oh my God, that was a great question," or whatever. But it does make a difference. And I've interviewed my students in various ways. So how did that go? I've done Google Forms. Those are the kinds of feedback mechanisms I think that really sort of gives students a sense of ownership and inspire them to continue to not only to come to class, but to commit at a pragmatic, a material, at a cellular, at an existential level to what it is that you're doing in the context of the class.
Yeah, it's like saying their contribution and their personal experience matters to the classroom. That's a community. Without that pressure, I think that what I love about Jan's examples and Kiana's example too of saying, just put in the chat if you'd like to have a one-on-one, is these are all voluntary things. These are all things that, if a student's in that room and decides not to put a sticker on that map, nothing's going to happen to them. But they're ways of saying, I care about what you have to say. I care about your contribution, and I'm part of this room. I'm not the room, which I think is great. So, yeah, so I think we actually went through some effective examples already. We actually got to that one that's on my list here. Let's go right to our final question to leave some time to let others chime in here as well. And that's just the idea of all these things that you've experienced, all these things that you've tried over this time, what things that you've tried over this time are you going to keep that you think will still be useful? It doesn't matter where you are, or there's things that you can transfer over that will be really helpful. So I'll start again with Jan.
Okay, well, you know, I said that at the outset of the switch over to online. I said nothing's going to change. Our lectures are going to be exactly how they were, and that lasted for a while. But by the time I got to a summer course, I realized that there has to be a shift, and so I did a shift in the way I teach, and I think I will stick with this shift. And basically, what I did, and I had to learn. Part of this is you know, a self-reflection as well, not just checking in with the students, but also checking in with yourself. Is this working? Is this not working? So I learned the hard way how to properly flip a class. And I found that, yes, it is way more time consuming for me just to set that up. And it is kind of more work for the students to, you know, watch these pre-recorded things and ask questions. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share my screen again, just to demonstrate. It's another way of engaging. I mentioned engaging students asynchronously. So again, this can be done in D2L. I'm very familiar with using Top Hat. So like, okay, well, I gotta find it. I've got so many windows open. Uh-oh. Wait, okay, so you're actually gonna see my email for a second. Never mind, there we go. So let me just move this out of the way. So yeah, part of going online is knowing how to be very efficient with the technology, like using Zoom and going between screens. So this is an example of one of my lessons that I created. I put in some artwork, checked in with students, some things that they know about fatty acid metabolism, perhaps some artwork, a blurb that I wrote in my video lecture. And then to engage the students, I came up with some questions immediately thereafter, just to see, did you understand the video lecture I just gave? And of course, I'd provide them with blank PowerPoint notes. And then it's sort of lather, rinse, repeat. Maybe I have a little YouTube video on meat, a bit more of a blurb, more of a video lecture, more questions. And so this kind of helped the students, in my opinion, get the basics before coming to class. And then when we're in class, we talk about it. They email me questions in advance. We have a discussion. We do sample problems. And this is my third run through doing it this way, and the students really, really seem to like it. So in my field where things don't change all that much, chemistry, like the level of chemistry I teach, things are fairly consistent. So in my particular field, that works. I think I will continue to use that, but I very, very much look forward to seeing students in person.
Absolutely. But yeah, that idea that there's ways for the self-checks to be built in a little bit before they even start to ask their questions is a nice feature for sure. Kiana.
Yeah, those are all very good points, because similar, you know, like in my field, there are same type of, you know, theory and regressions and questions that you have to discuss. So it's definitely, at least in my opinion, way more efficient for us as an instructor to just spend some time, create something. And if I'm teaching 2 sections of the same course, at least like I'm consistent and, you know, like not forget to say an example in one section and not in the other. It's very consistent. I keep that. I committed to always improve those a little bit every semester when it comes to examples or some more adds in question. Every time I'm participating in this type of, you know, meetings, I learn something new and I'll try to incorporate it. So I think that it's definitely more efficient, and it's very good way of continuing that even if we turn to in-person classes. One thing I specifically will keep is now I have access to more people in my you know, professional setting that I would like to invite as a guest speaker. Before I was really limited to, you know, who's in Toronto, who's willing to come on campus and talk to students. Now I can just, like tap into my connections in Ottawa, in Vancouver. They're gonna just like dial in and give their presentation, and they are happy to do it because it's just not that much of a cost on their side as well. And I am hoping to keep that. A lot of other activities that I do, because it's hands-on. Previously, I would have just maybe go to the website, show them where they can get that, but it's going to be harder to like demonstrate it live, then just ask them, you do it, and we come back and we discuss. Like right now, they all go get a data, plot something, and come back and discuss. And it's just only because it's virtual this way that this is possible. Otherwise, I would have just lecture of, you go there, you get the data, hopefully you're going to see this graph, hopefully try it later, and they are not. But I'm hoping to keep some of this advantages of online teaching, which worked for me.
Yeah, those opportunities to try things. That's a good point. And how you can bring that back to the classroom can be a little tricky for sure. I know one thing that I've been using a little bit with students too, and especially because most of them bring a laptop, not all necessarily, but you can have them pair up, but is QR codes on the screen too. Or if there's something they can do on their phone that they can just point it up and go, oh yeah, let's try this out, right? So that's another little thing that I've used in the past. But yeah, I mean, we were talking when we were planning for this panel about the idea of discipline specific stuff as well. So I thought maybe, and Dana made a point about that when we were preparing for this, about how, some of these things, like we're pre-recording a lecture, and whether or not that really makes the best sense for a class like yours, Dana, and what will you bring back, and what do you think you'll actually want to really bring back into a lecture hall?
Well, I definitely think that lecturing in an anthropology course or in language and intercultural relations or in arts and contemporary studies, there's a special magic in working in the social sciences and doing that in the context of other people being there, because it is deeply dialogical in nature, right? So it can be the beginning of a conversation that a student can ask a question that they can bring up an example, right? So there is, I think, a degree of artificiality to sort of preparing a lecture, at least in the context of anthropology, preparing a lecture without sort of the possibility of having a conversation with a student. At least that's the way I teach. It's always a conversation, right? But I really actually love Jan's check-ins. It's actually an interesting dialogue in and of itself, I think, because students are sort of, I think, confronted with the possibility of checking their knowledge, right? You learned a thing, now you check your knowledge. I love that, Jan. I hope that, maybe going forward, I can bring in something like that. But I think for me, the biggest lesson of this whole experiment has been the fact that high stakes assignments and testing is just not where I want to go in the future. I find that students perform at a much better level based on sort of some of my expectations about what I want them to get from the course. So I've started to build basically a what I call an iterative structured assignment structure, so that students work over the course of the semester over 12 weeks to produce small writing pieces that they compile at the end and then turn in as an assignment that I call a dossier. So they turn in a final dossier, and then they're able to reflect on basically their growth over time. And this is one of the things, of course, that Michael Wesch kind of builds into the structure of the course, which is that, he frames it as sort of if anyone knows Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, which of course, we can critique this particular paradigm, but I think it's really interesting for students to be able to think about their own trajectory in the microcosm of the classroom, but also in the macrocosm of their university experience, and then of course as a life experience as well. So it's an interesting kind of meta exercise that I found to be extremely useful. Yeah, Monica, thank you. Yeah, Joseph Campbell's so fascinating. And students love it. They reflect, the kinds of reflections that we got in the fall of 2020 were mind-blowing. You see the transformation of students over time, and it's something that can be delivered to a large course. So that for me is something that I'd like to bring forward and continue with, as we move forward. And I think that I'm going to bring this into my other courses as well. Even linguistics, which is super well, it's traditionally taught with high stakes testing and high stakes assignments. But I think I'm going to also sort of change that to reflect this new commitment as well.
That's great. And I love that the dossier gives that opportunity to reflect so nicely, where you get to look at everything you've done all year. And there's some, and Karen probably can address this probably better than I can, but there's some research out there that suggests that like this whole idea of having more active learning and having students do things themselves, when they don't reflect on it, they don't necessarily think they've learned anything. But then when you get them to actually think about what they've learned as part of the process, they see the connections, right? So yeah, that's fantastic. So I'd like to thank the three of you for coming and talking to us. And I'm going to open up the floor now a little bit more and let others join in. And I know that Monica wanted to share something that she does with her class. So I'll let Monica go first.
Sorry. So I had a few comments along the way for different things that how I did things. But one thing I'll say at the beginning is that I do prefer the in-person, and for online, I prefer the synchronous. Feedback from my nephews who was taking classes asynchronously at McMaster, as well as my students, is that most students prefer the synchronous classes because you can actually have that dialogue. Even online, you could do the dialogue. But some of the things that I did to try to, for the connection, I have introductions in all my courses now. I used to have it just in the course I designed, but now everyone does introductions. They have to do it before the first class. They do an introduction to themselves and have a certain set of questions that they can answer about why they're taking the course. In my course has to do with movies and TV. I ask, what's their favorite movie or TV science fiction? And then the other thing they need to do is they have to provide an avatar or a photo to represent them in class, as well as they put it on the introduction on the discussion board. I find it much easier to teach with pictures in front of me rather than black boxes. And I don't believe it's fair to everybody to have them put on video, because not everyone can do that. And then there's a lot of inequity, plus it takes up a lot of bandwidth. So they never turn on their videos. So in order to make them do this, for some of my classes, the introduction and avatars are bonus mark. And it's amazing what people will do for 1 mark. And for my course, my liberal studies course that I designed, it's actually the first of their mini assignments. So trying to make it more fun as well. So on top of having to do their introduction and the avatar, I then set up a people bingo. And they have to read everybody's introductions in order to fill out the bingo. And then that is what they submit for their final mark. One of the things that I'm going to probably continue doing is I set up weekly quizzes online to make sure that people actually kept up, because I posted all the lectures afterwards, and I don't want people to just wait and listen to or watch the lectures right before a term test, etc., before they did it. So I now have weekly quizzes online every Friday or every Monday evening to make sure that they kind of followed that week's courses, our topics, and I'll probably continue doing something along those lines. The other thing that I do in some of my classes, not all of them, is to do little pop quizzes using the poll function on Zoom, so that you can see if they actually understood that day's lecture. And the advantage to actually being in class is that I turn off the recording when we do the polls. and only those in class get to see them and see the answers. And it helps them when they do their quiz later on that week. As far as community, one of the things that I do, the introduction, everybody can read each other's introductions. That way they can get to know each other, and they do actually comment on each other's introductions. But I also set up several small group projects in the first 3 weeks, basically, of class, so that they get to know each other in different combinations. And that way they have a little bit more knowledge before choosing who they're going to do their major group project with. So those are some of the main things that I do for getting community going. I'm really worried more about community than anything else. And so in the beginning of class, those 10 minutes I use to talk to them about the sorts of things that Jan was asking in the first class. But I love the idea of having things that they can annotate and stuff like that, rather than having to put it in chat or coming out loud.
Yeah,
so I'm gonna definitely do that.
That activity at the beginning, like just having an activity up and something they can sort of play with or try. Like in my winter course, I have a check it out thing because it's a visualizing facts course. So there's lots of cool tools and apps and things to try. So I put up a link to something cool to try. And then after the 10 minutes, we talk about what they thought of it and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's lots of, those 10 minutes have been a big thing, right? Like,
yeah, I love them. I actually love those 10 minutes. I know my students more now than I ever did in class because they have to talk to me online. In class, they're just talking to each other. They ignore me.
Yeah, I usually try and like at least go like, you know, the front row kids will talk to you, right? So like there's usually a little bit of the like go up to a couple people in the front row and talk to them in person. But yeah, you get different people in this space than you would have gotten otherwise. So that's been a little bit of a bonus. I know, Jan, too, you've shared, I know you had a class mascot at one point too, right? I have to bring that up before.
Yeah, sadly, my bunny was our class mascot, and he actually died this weekend.
Oh no!
Yeah, so I'm just I'm kind of dreading my class, which is up at noon, because they always want to see him. So yeah, you know what? Like even things like this. This is one of my class mascots. It's this postcard that I had framed, and you know, a way of showing, you know, your students that you're human. Here's my pet. If you got a pet, they'd love to see it. And just having conversations about interests, you know, they talk about my stereo equipment over here. So yeah, just having a human element or just having a connection somehow between you and your class is always a nice thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's why there's this blanket over here so the cats want to lie down, right?
Perfect.
Yeah. I missed your cat tree, Dana. I think you used to have a cat tree behind you as well. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions, Karen, or was there anything else in the chat?
I don't think anything else has come in the chat, but we can open up the floor if Kiva or Ada or Michelle or Nanzian have a question.
Yeah, Monica mentioned the music. The music's big too, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I have my Google Home beside me and I'll sometimes take requests. There's Bundo. Oh, in memoriam. How beautiful. What a lovely, lovely bunny.
Sorry about your bunny, Jan. Poor bunny.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I also have a cat and he'll go tearing across and jump up on the thing. And yeah, students are always really excited when he comes through.
Yeah.
So, yeah. If
the cat's there, I usually get like at least 5 people in the chat just write cat with 1,000,000 exclamation marks beside it. Yeah. And that's one thing I will definitely lose out on when we're back in person. I'm not going to bring my cat to class because a lot of people have allergies too, including me, but for some reason they changed as I got older, so I'm lucky. Yeah. That's true, Monica. Yeah, you end up meeting students who have actually similar taste in music. You get to know each other more in these weird spaces. It's been strange, absolutely. And hopefully we can find ways to continue to connect with students in person as well if we hadn't used them before.
I participated in a really great icebreaker last night as part of our teaching in higher education course with Chang. I'm co-facilitating with one of the graduate educational developers, and it has she called it peekaboo, but basically everyone has their cameras off, and this is typically how it is with undergrads anyway. And then she poses questions, and if you agree with the question, you can either unmute your camera and show your face, or you can use a reaction button. So we had questions like cats versus dogs, are you a cat person? And then people would peekaboo. Or are you pro pumpkin spice latte? And then people would peekaboo. And then we'd have conversations around these very silly questions, but it was just a great way to see who's in the room. Is which Star Trek is the best Star Trek of all time? And then you have people peekaboo over different kinds of questions. And so it just it was neat to see who was in the room in a very short amount of time. So again, in that first 10 minutes, you can ask questions like that are interesting to engage in.